Hi now, people. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and you won't be seeing that much of me after this first introduction. I'm just here to tee up culture editor Rad Simonpillai, who is going to talk to Deepa Mehta about her new film, Funny Boy. And Rad is also here to offer some talking points. Well, not talking points, but let's think of them as bullet points, things you're going to need to know when he has that conversation. Because if you're not familiar with Funny Boy or Deepa Mehta's career or the recent history of the Tamil diaspora, you're going to be lost pretty quickly. So, hi, Rad.
Hello.
Tell me what I need to know.
Well, I mean, let's start off with Funny Boy itself, right? Like this novel. I mean, Funny Boy is a novel by Shyam Selvadurai, who is half Tamil, half Sinhalese, and Canadian. He's here. He's Toronto-based. Funny Boy is his 1994 debut novel. It's a queer Tamil narrative, a coming-of-age story. It's about a young boy who is growing up in Sri Lanka in the 70s, leading up to the 80s, and it's about him, being doubly oppressed as both a queer person and a Tamil person. So like that's the the kind of the context of his upbringing is he's in Colombo, which is the main city of Sri Lanka. He's navigating this ethnic tension between him being one of the minority Tamils and the majority Sinhala population. And he's navigating this in the events that lead up to what's called Black July, 1983's Black July, which was like basically an anti-Tamil pogrom in Colombo, where a lot of Sinhalese people went and looted Tamil people's homes, burned them. About thousands of Tamils died from that event. My own house was burned and looted. I ended up in a refugee camp when I was a child with my parents, and that's how I ended up in Canada, along with hundreds of thousands of Tamils. So that's kind of the background story behind Funny Boy. But this is an important book when you think about it, because it's like, okay, like I mean, just the fact that it's a queer Tamil narrative, how often do you see that? But this is a very layered novel that connects to so many people. Like it's an immigrant narrative, it's a refugee narrative, it's a queer narrative, but it's also speaking specifically to the Tamil diaspora. This was like, for the Tamil diaspora, so many of us here in Canada, that was our only representation for years, right? I'm talking about a 1994 novel. We had no representation in mainstream media. So that's why that novel is so important. And that's why people are very, very cautious about this movie that has been made, but directed by Deepa Mehta, adapting the novel. The movie is co-written by both Shyam and Deepa Mehta, and they made this movie, which, is a good movie. And it resonates today. There's a reason a story like this resonates today. It's, this is a story about, this is, if you can imagine it, this is a story of what would happen to the US if Donald Trump and the Proud Boys really went to the extreme.
Okay.
Like if all of a sudden the government, if the government kind of co-ops the violent hate of the population towards the minorities. This is a movie about social movements, right? In the conversation that we have in the upcoming interview, we talk about how social movements today are very siloed, or, where people are doing their different things. And this is about a time where people were united for a cause. So, it's a very relevant story today, but of course the controversy around this movie there's a few things. It has to do with the casting of the movie, and it has to do with associations people are making about Deepa Mehta, right? So one of the, sorry, did you want to ask a question?
Well, I was just going to say, yeah, about an hour after the project was revealed and the release dates were announced, everybody started shouting about different things. There were, as you say, arguments about the casting, arguments about Deepa being involved, and then something about dubbing as well. So if you want to walk me through all of that, or at least I'm assuming, no, not assuming, because I mean, that's part of your interview, but those of us who were on the outside of that conversation, I mean, I definitely needed a couple of extra pointers on some of the controversies.
It's interesting because, okay, so first of all, I watched this movie, it was late summer. So I immediately, when I watched this movie, I was like, oh my God, they're not Tamil actors, because they are butchering the language, right? Like the main actors, like absolutely butchering it. Like I didn't even actually realize it was Tamil at first, right?
So this is like a phonetic performance kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's, look, you know how I don't let anyone say my name, Radheyan? I don't let people say it the Tamil way. It's because you have to have the inflections. You have to know how to get your tongue around that. Deepa Mehta knows how to do that, right? How to say my name the Tamil way. But if you're not, if you don't have that, you call me Rad, you call me Radheyan, you don't try, right? So that's, you think of that as the barrier for these actors who don't know anything about the Tamil language and who are coming in and playing these roles that are so, it's a sensitive issue when you have other people playing these roles, because the oppression of Tamils have so much to do with language. And so that's what we get into. That's what this conversation is about. And it's not just me and Deepa and Shyam. Deepa actually invited Dr. Nimmi Gowrinathan, who is an academic who's written texts on Sri Lankan freedom fighters and stuff, or Tamil freedom fighters specifically. She also invited Cheran Rudhramoorthy, he's a poet and an associate professor at Windsor, and he helped her translate the Tamil dialogue in the film. And I brought along, because, I just felt outgunned with all these smart people, I brought along Nedra Rodrigo, who is an academic. She curates the Tam Fam Lit Jam, which is like a literature and film festival for Tamil, like curating Tamil work. And she also founded the Tamil Studies Symposium at York University. And she's she's doing her PhD in refugee narrative. So this is the roundtable we put together to have a really serious conversation about this topic. And you'll know, so I told you this conversation happened November 4th. Well, in the immediate aftermath of this conversation, they decided to redub the movie.
And have you seen that dub version?
I just did. I mean, they just finished it. It was we're talking about like all of this is happening within the last few, 10 days, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
I watched it last night. It's a significant improvement. They couldn't fix all the dialogue, but they did manage to replace actor Sima Biswas's dialogue. She plays the grandmother character, and her dialogue was very atrocious. So they replaced her voice altogether with a local Tamil filmmaker's voice, and that's a huge improvement right there. Ali Kazmi, he was coached to do much better, to the point that his dialogue is even better than the half Tamil, half Sri Lankan actress Nimmi Karasmugama's dialogue. So that there's a significant improvement there. But yes, I wasn't as taken out as much as I was the first time around, but the scars are still there. There's still some actors, there's still a significant amount of actors who are butchering the language, so as much as there's an improvement, I mean, there's still the issue of representation and what does it mean to have these people take on these roles.
ஒரு நாளும் என் ஹஸ்பண்டுக்கு இதை சொல்ல எனக்கு முடியாது. நான் தமிழ்ஸே admire பண்ணுறேன்.
I mean, what's bringing us all together is, of course, you invited me to see the film, and there's so many beautiful elements in this film that I was taken aback by, like the opening, so many performances, so many tender moments. But of course, the big barrier to me was the language situation, right? Like I immediately could tell, oh, these are not Tamil actors, because I didn't initially even recognize that they were speaking Tamil at first. And that really did pull me out of the film. So just from there, I guess can we discuss what was the thought process in casting these main roles?
Well, first of all, I think 50% of the actors are Tamil. Mm-hmm. That I don't know if you know that, but that's a reality. And 50% of them are from Sri Lanka. They're Sri Lankan Tamil. The main actor, who is one of the main, is Nimmi Harsagama, who is Tamil, half Tamil and half Sinhala. And then the rest are all Tamil. Representation is such a touchy subject now, and it's an important one. And since I have come to this country, I mean, I've seen it grow. I mean, I got into such flack because I did a film called Water, and I cast the young girl who plays the lead in it, and it's a story about Hindu widows. And I cast her because I thought she was terrific, and she's actually a Sinhalese little girl. So I got a lot of flack from the Hindus for casting a Sinhala, and they said her Hindi was really bad, and how could I do it? And it's you can get into it forever. But finally, it is about the coaching of Cheran, which really helped, I thought. And also it is about how do you remain true to your characters. Mm. That was the thought process, to remain true to the characters, to have the right actors play them, to have as many Tamils as possible. But you also have to understand, Radheyan, I don't know when the last time you worked in Sri Lanka, but Tamils are really are not that, they're still a group that is being persecuted. It isn't that easy for them to come out and say, I want to be a part of a gay film. Mm-hmm. They are scared. So when we had an open casting call in Sri Lanka, we had one in Canada, we had one in London, we didn't have one in America because I don't want to have anything to do with Trump's America. But that's just me. We had one when we had one in Toronto. There were some actors who were fabulous. There's a Tamil Sri Lankan director called Lennon Sivam, and I'd seen all his films, and he had a wonderful actor who was in 1999, and I really wanted him to play Jagan. And then his father got sick, and then the film got postponed, and then I approached him again, and then he got married. So it was things like this. People couldn't get visas because they were refugees. So we really did look hard, but it got to a point where we said, okay, I can't make a compromise with the characters. So some of the actors come from Canada. Two of them, Agam Darshi, comes from Canada, and so does Appa. I had little RG, who is from India. I looked for, Avi is a wonderful little actor from Sri Lanka, but I needed the range, and I got it from, as long as I felt I wasn't getting a white actor to play. I felt we were all Southeast Asian, and Sri Lankans were the same thing.
Well, I mean, so I'll just clarify, like you said, like half the cast is Tamil, but it's like, so for me, it's like the ones that speak the most, or like the most prominent characters is RG. Like RG, I mean, I get there's the challenge of finding like the very specific Tamil actor who is queer to play that kind of a role. But so it's RG, Nimmi, who had the best, like of all the actors, Nimmi was closest to nailing the Tamil language. And she's, as you said, half Tamil, and she landed, so she plays the mother. But then you have the father, the LTTE fighter, and the grandmother, all who were like, so had to be, I guess you invested in a dialect coach instead of casting Tamil. And it's just hard for me to, like, it's hard for a lot of us to believe that it was hard to cast a Tamil actor between Canada and Sri Lanka, because Canada, we have like two.
I did try. I did try. I mean, I told you.
Yeah.
I had 3 actors that were, if they were available. I mean, I don't want to sound defensive, No. I really did try. Some of them were not available. Others were not right for the fit. So am I going to get an actor who's not right for the fit? Or am I going to get an actor and say, I don't care that your father's sick, you have to come to Sri Lanka. I don't care that you have a refugee status and you don't have a visa, you have to come. You can't, there's a time, but I don't want to sound defensive. It is what it is. I don't care, Radheyan, if you're going to punish me or take me to task for this, go ahead.
No, and here's the thing. Like, and here's, I don't know if, like, by the way, anyone who wants to jump in, jump in, because me and Deepa can hog all the airtime, by the way.
Well, I don't mind also coming.
I think that if you can, and I think that why isn't anybody saying how wonderful it is that we got a gay guy to play a gay character? So we really rapped on the knuckles for not getting a Tamil Agam, but we are getting, how important was it for you, Shyam?
I mean, Radheyan, I find it interesting when you say it's so easy to find Tamil actors in Sri Lanka. It simply isn't.
I'm saying between Toronto.
To understand that there's been a vast kind of sort of exodus to the diaspora. And it's very difficult. When I was growing up in Sri Lanka before 1983, there were a lot of Colombo Tamil actors actually in the amateur theatre, but they just dispersed like we did. So it's really difficult to find them. And I did look. I mean, I contacted all the amateur theatre groups. I contacted universities that had departments. I have friends in those departments. It just they don't exist. I mean, it's really difficult to say that, but they don't exist. And even here, I mean, I asked Cheran, I asked Lenin. I mean, Lenin sent me his last film. And it's interesting that Lenin, who's like this quintessential Sri Lankan Tamil director, had to also hire another South Asian actor for the lead because he couldn't find Sri Lankan Tamil to play the lead. I mean, this is the long arm of 1983, as I always say. This is what it means to be Sri Lankan. This is what the war has done to us Tamils. It has decimated us on some level. And so I feel that on some level that needs to be said, that we are always, as an artist, I've been aware that I'm flying with one wing, because that's the reality of being Sri Lankan and Sri Lankan Tamil in particular. And I really genuinely thought Deepa looked, and I also really genuinely wanted people with the correct Colombo accent. And while the film seems to have popped you out of it. For me, if I didn't have that accent, it would have popped me out of it too. Plus all the people in Colombo who would have seen the film and whose opinions important to me, because the book is a reflection of that tiny word of Sri Lanka. And the fact that it goes beyond that is fantastic for me. But ultimately, there's a kind of veracity to it that I never really thought I'd get in the film. But I am delighted, and I truly am delighted to have Brandon, because I know just how difficult it is to be queer and South Asian. And not just there, but even here, I meet a lot of young people in queer organizations who are still not out to their families and communities. And I think that it's quite a marvel, actually, to have somebody who's an out proud Sri Lankan actor playing this lead, and I just, so that's really important to me. And I just wanted to say that.
Yeah. By the way, does anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, because I suppose it's because I've seen so many Tamil films come out of, I've seen quite a few Ilam Tamil films, let's say. So I don't know what this shortage of Tamil actors is, because I just know so many. But apart from that, I think, so if it's a question of whether you want Tamil that's spoken with a Sinhala accent, or whether you want Colombo Tamil that's spoken with a Jaffna Tamil accent or an Indian Tamil accent, I mean, these are things that we could go on about. But there is something a little problematic about having Sinhala people portray Tamil people. And I do want us to talk about that, because having a hegemonic culture portray an oppressed or a conquered or a colonized group is not generally understood as an empathic gesture, right? I mean, whether they're wearing fringes and feathers or blackface or whatever. So if we say, okay, it's important for them to all be Sri Lankan, you're also telling a story about Ulam, right? Because there's multiple references to separatism and the separate state. So what is going on in that process when a Sinhala actor takes on the role, the skin of a Tamil person? Is that empathy? Is that a narcissistic empathy? Do they feel entitled to take on that role? Do they see it as a sign of their own magnanimity? Like, there's so many questions that come up for me. And I'm a Colombo Tamil as well, right, Shyam? So it's not that I come into it out of some sort of insistence on Ulam Tamil purity or anything like that, but I wasn't hearing Colombo Tamil there either, right? I was hearing Tamil that made it really uncomfortable for me while I was watching the film. Mm-hmm. And while there are beautiful moments, and we can talk about those as well, there's it seemed to me like this idea that would be brilliant in a workshop setting, but once it's out there in a film and it's out there in a representative capacity, who's watching this film? How do they see themselves reflected in it? What are you expecting this film? What kind of story are you expecting this film to tell? I guess in that sense, it sort of brings it back to a very basic question of who you expected to be an audience for it. Like, if it's that tight little Colombo crowd that you're focused on, is that your audience? Are you surprised if this movie goes into diaspora and people react to it differently?
I think that, well, a couple of things. Firstly, my thing is, as the more individual you are, the more specific you are, the more universal you end up becoming. And that is the approach I took with my writing the novel, as with all my novels. And so I hoped by the authenticity of it, that it would go broader. Now, in an ideal situation, I would have loved to have had, of course, Colombo Tamil actors play the role. But this is not an ideal situation we're working in. And so I'm happy to have Sri Lankan actors in these roles. And I don't think it's blackface. I think it's not blackface at all. I think these people have also been through the Civil War. And yes, they're not Tamil. And yes, they haven't experienced it in the same way. But, and I don't really feel that they're putting on a role coming from privilege or whatever. This is what we found, and this is what worked. And this is the best thing that's come out of it. So I just feel like, yeah, I mean, I think it's
I'm not saying that it's blackface, Shyam. I'm just saying that given that there is this discourse about, hegemonic cultures and oppressed cultures, that's it's out there, right? Where we're having conversations about this. So in that context, I was just wondering if that had occurred to you, that it would be problematic, it would be difficult for a group that has been historically marginalized to see this happen, right? Yes, so I don't want to sort of write it off as blackface, but you know.
Well, Nimmi, Nimmi, would you like to talk about that, because you have spoken about it?
On the language question, I'm not a native speaker now, so I feel, it would be difficult for me to comment on that. Though I see, very clearly what the critique is there. Yeah, I think that the question of audience that Nedra raises is, of course, important. This idea of, for me, I didn't know, so a lot of these conversations, Nedra, Radheyan, the film is completed, no? So for me, I'm sort of looking at it in terms of this moment right now with a completed film, the sort of political conversations this can start, and the ones that we can have inside the community, But these feel like probably decisions that happened well before the film was made, and the struggle that I'm having a little bit is that there is kind of a, I've spoken to a lot of Tamils about this film, and I hear a lot of the critique, and I understand a lot of the critique. And I think, there is this tendency we all know inside the community to have a kind of purist approach. There's a purity test at times for anything that goes out there. To me, this feels at this moment like something that has crossed over, that will cross over to non-Tamil audiences, right? And when that happens, there are very few things that have, right, crossed over that talk about the violence in any particular way or depict that violence. For me, it was a film about the anomalies of the nationalist project, and I think that's interesting to me. It is. I don't think there's enough out there that we can build on, even if you don't agree with the way it's put forward, that we can build on to explore the anomalies of the nationalist project. So we move away from a kind of purist nationalism, that we have an expansive, a kind of inclusive nationalist conversation. And so the political consciousness of Nimmi's character, as it evolves slowly, as she separates from her husband, the way in which the queer identity moves back and forth between the threat from being Tamil to the threat from being queer, and keeps moving back and forth in these spaces. Those to me are, if I write something or when I write something, that would be a space for me to explore. Again, not to say these conversations aren't very important, but I think it's important to note that the film is finished. So it's not, if we had these conversations earlier, perhaps we could have all been a part of finding actors and other sorts of things. But the film is finished. So the question for us in the community has to be, from this point on, are we going to do this blanket boycott because of these issues, or are we going to, extract from it what might be useful to us, you know, in terms of a platform.
I don't think, sorry, me and Nedra were actually, you mentioned the boycott, and like that's not a thing that.
No, yeah, I know.
No, I mean, I know people are.
It's just out there,
very
you know.
extreme
So
voices that are calling for that, and we are not we don't believe in shutting out. We don't believe in. Sorry,
I've heard that.
Yeah. So like, I mean, because the thing is, there's so much beauty in this film. I mean, I was wowed by the fact that we were going there with some of the conversations that when it comes to kind of the nationalism and what went on and that history. I love that me and Nedra were talking about the tenderness of the moments when, you know, the grandmother and that neighbor are fighting and a woman offers them tea and they just get to seethe in their corners. I thought that was such a beautiful depiction of how intimate the tension could be before it blows up, right? So I think there's so much done. It's just and then the language thing just kind of, it's like an infection that ruins everything and spreads because
Cheran, it's all your fault, Cheran. It's all your fault.
Sorry, before we go on, can I just say something before we go on? Nidra, I don't want to get adversarial about it because I respect you too much, and I understand that the conversation should happen. I really do, but please also, I hope people understand that making any movie is very difficult. And you know, it's always made in this kind of sort of crucible of difficulty. And the main thing about the film, and I think Nimmi also touched on it, is its politics, is what it portrays about the Civil War and about queerness and the coming together of these marginal spaces. And I think that was really important for me in the movie. And I hope that when people are talking about the Tamil and Tamil actors, that they're also acknowledging this. Of what the film's actual politics are.
Can I just add something? Because that's the thing when you talk about.
Radheyan, can I add a few things on the issue of language as a way of giving some the background. So when I grew up in Jaffna, speaking Tamil, and I believed at my initial stages of writing and growing up in Jaffna, that the Tamil spoken in Jaffna is the best Tamil and the purest Tamil. That was the kind of belief that all of us, most of us who grew up there, we were kind of, quote unquote, educated that way. But then when I started writing and visiting various places, then I realized that the Tamil spoken in Badamarachi is a bit different from Tamil spoken in Baligamam. And as a matter of fact, when I first time went to Chennai in 1983, when I started speaking in Tamil, their response was either they started speaking to me in Malayalam or they started speaking to me in English, saying, "Why are you butchering Tamil?" Because they had no idea that the kind of way the Tamil speak in Jaffna is different. So when I agreed to do the Tamil translation of the dialogue from Shyam's English thing Tamil, and I was aware that it needs to be in the context of Kalambu Tamil, even though in the context of Kalambu Tamil, there are differences. The Kalambu Tamil being spoken in Cinnamon Garden is different from Jambata or Kotahena, or even the kind of Tamil that's being spoken in different parts of upcountry. So I was aware of the fact. So I did the Tamil translation, and then I ran by it with my nieces who were born and grew up in Kalambu. So that is how this dialogue in Tamil came out. But obviously, and of course, if someone who was born in Kalambu, in Cinnamon Garden, in Karwakad, grew up there and speaking Tamil the way, if he or she can become an actor, that's a completely different story. But in my understanding is that the context that, well, this is how, in terms of translation, in the way they speak is there. So I do not want to privilege any kind of dialect or any kind of Tamil or the other one in the name of pure Tamil or in the name of any other hierarchies, right? I think that should be very key for us to understand.
But I think you're sort of deflecting from certainly from the issue I was raising, which is not about purity, about Tamil purity. Obviously, as someone of Indian background, growing up in Colombo and whatever, I grew up in the middle of all of this. It's not that I'm saying that the actors should aspire or should have aspired to a pure Tamil, but rather that the lack of legibility, right? That it was hard to understand what they were saying was the problem for me. Yeah. And the casting of Sinhala folks as Tamil folks. But I mean, we don't have to dwell on this because I would like to.
I'm going to interrupt, Nedra, because I think that I have been making films for the last 20 years. I did a film called Earth, where Hindus played Muslims and Muslims played Hindus. I mean, as long as they belong to the same community about the partition, I've never heard this kind of a thing, that how dare, what does it mean for a Muslim to play a Hindu? You know what I mean? It's so sad, because these people, the Sinhalese people who played Tamil characters, two of them, one was actually a Pakistani Canadian, they really believed in what the Tamils had to go through. They actually had complete empathy. They didn't think they were doing anybody a favor. They've actually felt really ashamed of what they had done to the Tamils, even though they weren't even properly born at that time. These were really politically aware, sensitive, and really thoughtful young men. But you're saying because they were Sinhalese, they should be dismissed. That's not fair.
I think
I'm not saying that, Deepa. I'm not saying that at all. And some of the people in your movie are friends of mine. So that's there's another element to it. I know that they are sympathetic people. I don't have anything personally against them. Far from it. It is a question of representation. And, I think we can move off this topic now because, as Nimmi said, there are other things that we can take out of this conversation.
I would just suggest, I mean, first, of course, this is a society that it's not Hindu-Muslim. It's fractured along the lines of language. So, of course, this becomes a particularly volatile question. But given that the film is completed, and again, not as a native speaker, but I've heard the Tamil critique from a number of people who are native speakers. What would, let's say, Radheyan or Nader or people who are native speakers, what would you like to see from the filmmaker, from the writer, that would address this in some way? Because that's really the issue at this point. Like, how can they address? The film is done. They are clearly taking it seriously. They've put forward how they tried to. They're having a conversation about it. But from inside the Tamil community at this point with a finished film, what can they do to sort of, make clear either the effort that's gone in or acknowledge, the limitations that were there?
Well, see, this is where, first of all, because I'm not I get that we want to we're at a kind of a barrier in the sense of this movie is done, right? And to Shyam, but we do need to address and correct some of these explanations. Because when Shyam says he really wanted to represent the politics. Well, the Tamil factor does affect the politics, because the movie itself also brilliantly acknowledges that one of the instigating factors in the war was the lack of opportunity for Tamil people in employment and such like that. And then the Tamil people did not were not cast in these kind of prominent roles. And then when we talk about representation, this side can represent this side. There's a flattening of identities that is happening here that I don't think is real representation, especially when someone who is Tamil will have as much to do with, say, someone who is Sinhalese as they would have more in common with, say, maybe a Puerto Rican than they would, like a Jaffna Tamil would have more in common with a Puerto Rican than they would with an upper class Sinhalese Sri Lankan, so to speak, right? There's different kind of aspects of what experience is really being represented. And one line in the movie actually kind of speaks to the whole flattening of experiences. The very last line of the movie is, "We are all free slaves in this country," right? Which felt to me like, okay, now we're kind of flattening the experience of all people of color, equating the Tamil experience to Black experiences and such like that. So there's a political dimension to the language factor, which does fly in the face of this talk of representation and of what's being represented, and just and kind of flies in the face of the very messages of the film, which again, I think there's so much in the film that is so well crafted that for anyone who does not know the language, this movie will work like gangbusters, as you have seen. Have you seen any? My wife saw the movie in the same screening that I did, and she absolutely loved it because she did not know that there was something off with the performances and the actors. In terms of what
are you talking about performances, or are you talking about accents, or the
performance?
accent?
It's not accent. It's not accent. What
did you think of the performances, Radheyan?
The performances are incredible. I think Nimmi is fantastic. Even the Sinhala guy playing the LTT fighter, which is politically loaded, he's a fantastic actor. Right? These are, I'm not doubting the performance. There's so much quality in this movie. I'm not doubting a single moment of it, which is why I feel so like heartbroken that, that one thing is like taken away from the rest. Cause like, yeah, that actor is fantastic. I don't know, Nedra, do you have anything to add about that any of the qualities of the performances there? But as I said, there's so many tender moments. It was funny to me. I loved it more when they were speaking English, because whenever they spoke Tamil is when I was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, it was almost as if I wished it had been just done in English, right?
Yeah.
But
you know, if it had been done in English, you would have said it's not authentic because it's done in English and it's been done for a white
But it's not authentic as it is because it wasn't done in Tamil.
No, Cheran disagrees.
So can I just ask, because I mean, to be honest, I don't speak Tamil because my mother is Sinhalese and I grew up in Sri Lanka. So when Deepa asked me to do this, I asked Cheran if he would be able to do it, and if he couldn't, to suggest somebody else. And then he said he could, and I wanted Colombo Tamil, and not know, I just knew it was a different Tamil. So then I did take it. I did take his translation to two Colombo Tamil women of that background, and then they corrected it. And I brought it back to Cheran, and then he fixed it more. So you have to understand from my point of view that I have done like everything I can possibly do about it, I mean, and I just feel like, so I just feel like on some level, there has to be some sort of acknowledgement.
Oh, no. I mean,
the main thing is that, Radheyan, you have to know, and you must know that I really tried. If I hadn't, I think I would say, absolutely, I am so sorry. I didn't try. I should have tried. I know I went through a year of auditions, whether it was here in Toronto, whether it was in Colombo. And yes, I did meet lots of Sri Lankan Tamil actors, but who were, for me, some of them were excellent, 2 of them did not fit the role, and 4 of them were terrified of being a part of a film that was about homosexuality. Because actually they feel that oppression even to this day. They are so scared. That's the reality of what's happening with Tamils there. Yes, civil war might be over, but there is still a fear of not wanting to be in the eyes of that government. And I think they're right to be.
But see, then you chose to shoot in Sri Lanka because instead of casting Tamil people, because of their fear of Sri Lanka, in a story of their animosity against Sri Lanka. And this ties into some of the reasons why people are calling for a boycott, because people are calling for a boycott because they're reciting that time where you had tea with Rajapaksa.
Like, but that's bullshit. Excuse me. I'm so sorry.
I'm not agreeing with that. I mean, I do want you to answer to that, right? But I'm not siding with that.
This is like so. I had tea with Rajapaksa. Okay. Wow. That's amazing.
But I mean, you understand, like you're saying that these people.
No. I think this is really. This is like so sad. It is so sad that you would hit below the belt, and I'm really.
I mean,
just if you don't like the film and you don't like the effort I made, and you don't like what we did, that's fine.
I didn't say that. I'm giving the film a fairly positive review.
No, I know. I don't know.
No.
That's not the point. The point is what I'm really happy about is that we can have this discussion. that maybe Tamils will have this ability to have this discussion, whether they diss it or whether they critique it. At least the book has been out for 24 years. Why has not a Tamil director made it?
Well, then you have to ask, well, what are
No,
the
I'm
opportunities
just saying.
given to
I mean,
Tamil directors?
I asked many film directors that I did meet in Sri Lanka. You know, whether it was Vitapati, whether it was
Nobody offered.
Nobody offered. That's the reality.
Well, homosexuality is still criminalized, right?
Exactly.
Of course it is.
Exactly. And just think of the risk we took of making a film. It took us 1 year to get permission. I had about like 4 cups of tea, not with Rajapaksa, but with Ranil. That's for sure for this film. I've never met Rajapaksa in my life. But with Ranil, I did, because we had to get permission, because even though the book is translated into Sinhala and Tamil and is taught by Maitri in Colombo University, it's still very difficult.
Yeah, but that
We've done everything to do that. And it's not perfect. Thank you very much. Nedra, I'm sorry. Radheyan, I'm sorry that it's not perfect. But we tried, and the main point of the film is the oppression of minorities, what divisiveness does to people, what happens when you cannot express who you are, whether it's your culture, whether it's your sexuality. That, for me, is what attracted me to this wonderful book. Yes, there might be problems with the language. Yes, there might be problems with representation. Yes, you might not know how many people I actually, auditioned. And I've got those auditions. If you both want to see it, please feel free to see it. I wasn't lazy. I took 1 year to do it. And it's all up to all of you now. Think of it as that me saying, okay, you guys, go for it. Crucify me if you want to, but at least you'll have something to crucify and have a dialogue about your culture. Why aren't there Tamil actors who said we will do a homosexual film? Just find out. This is a platform for you to have a discussion. If you want to diss me, which you are, feel free to. But I feel actually very proud of this film. There is a purity in it. There's the purity of my intention in it. It's not perfect, but it touches my heart, because it talks about people who have been oppressed, and maybe people who didn't even know where Sri Lanka was, which many people don't actually. Then you go and suddenly, what, a civil war? It's just the way people didn't know that there were Hindu widows. They had no clue that there were Hindu widows. So I said, then Google it, look for it. Educate yourself. It's not, I had a Sinhalese girl play a Hindu widow. Thank God that you guys weren't there, because you would have killed me, I had a Muslim play, but it's like, yes, I know what's happening. And it's really good what you're saying. I love it. I actually really like it, because this is exactly, in a way, I wish it was a bit more gentle, but in a way I wanted. Let's start a dialogue. Yeah. Because what's the point of going through all this when we cannot have a dialogue?
Right.
That's all I say.
And can I just say that, that Radheyan, when you say that, when you raise the question of why, filming in Sri Lanka, and it's exactly that kind of sort of purity with which people talk about the project exasperates me. Because then where would we film it? In India? We can't afford to film in India. We're a small budget movie. Where else would we go to film the movie? And I just feel that I keep coming back to this over and I go.
Because, but Shyam, you know that. I mean, we were refused permission to shoot it in Sri Lanka twice.
Yes. Sorry, refused permission to shoot where?
In Sri Lanka. And then we had to go and get it.
For 1 year. Then we said, okay, let's look at the Maldives. Should we go to Malaysia? It's been such a difficult process to be authentic. And I said, we can't go to Malaysia. We cannot go to the Maldives. Maybe we shouldn't make the film, because it has to be at least truthful to the environment if it can't be truthful to other things. Not truthful, authentic.
And I questioned why was Sri Lanka so important if it came at the cost of people fearing playing these actors or playing these stories in Sri Lanka? Because you have a whole Tamil.
So what would you? I'm not understanding what you're saying.
I
So
know,
what are you saying?
I
Don't
mean, I
film
think
it in Sri Lanka. Don't
there was
make
an
it about Sri
implication
Lanka?
that some actors were too afraid to film a story about homosexuality in Sri Lanka.
So then film it where?
Actually, so the question is that we should have filmed it in India, where you would have been sitting right where you are, Radheyan, and said, this is inauthentic. Why didn't you shoot it in Sri Lanka?
I wouldn't have given a shit.
Yes,
about
you
the
would.
background.
No,
I'm talking about the opportunity for. I'm talking about the opportunity for actual, like, as you said, why are there no Tamil actors? Well, it's decisions like this.
I never said that. I said that 50% are Tamil actors, and we can give you an absolute breakdown. And Nimmi. And so don't put words in my mouth, because
I'm sorry, you said Tamil actors willing to play these roles. Like, I mean,
yes, but they were also, I must say, I'm getting a little agitated, which is not right, because I do like you, Radheyan. I think you're very
I love you, Deepa.
I really do. But you have to. I did ask Tamil Indian actors also. I mean, I was so desperate, and all of them said no. We did. We can't play a hero. And then I asked this wonderful actor who was in Sendhil, who was in another film that Gurinder did. He's from London, and he was a member of SAG, so he couldn't do it. We've been through the whole thing. It wasn't just, okay, let's go and cast whoever we can. Let's try and be authentic. We tried to be as authentic as we could. Representation is extremely important to me. We tried it. If we had gone that way, we wouldn't have made the film. So now we have a film, and now you can all talk about how the representation doesn't work and the accent doesn't work.
I think that it just, if I just come in. Sorry.
And if I can interject, and going back to what Nimmi said, like, what are the politics we can draw out of the film? Given that we can't, that the film is made, how can we talk about it? And I don't want to keep reducing it to a question of authenticity, as much as, like, there's the political aspect to language, the way language proficiency is used as a surveillance tool, right? So
truly,
in that sense, I would want, I think in terms of what I would look for, is some acknowledgement of that, like, because when I was a kid, during and shortly after the riots, Shyam, I don't know if you remember this, but the word baldia.
Yes, of course.
As this.
There was another word like that too.
Yeah. So the Sinhala word for bucket, right, was used as a way of testing whether you were Sinhala or not. Right? So it was a way of bullying Tamil kids to say, come on, say Baldia, because they were so sure you would say Baldi, or whatever. You would say it wrong, right? And so it became a tool for kids to bully us, for young men to sort of, bully young women.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you were not just vulnerable as a Tamil, that there's this threat of rape behind it too, right? So these are ways in which language is used as a surveillance tool. So that's the political aspect, and that's some of the painful history that people are bringing. It's not just a question of how purely or how beautifully someone speaks Tamil, but how we were policed in how we spoke Sinhala as well, right? And you'll see that in your film, and I hope this also becomes a talking point, because your Tamil actors would probably speak Sinhala a lot more easily and fluently, right? And there's a reason behind that. So that's something else that we need to tease out. So I think that there's a productive conversation that can be had around language that's not just about authenticity. Do you see what I'm saying? So
I think that's a wonderful conversation. I really do, Nidra. I think I would be so happy to think that people like you are having that. Yes.
I'm sure you agree, Nimmi. What do you think?
Yeah, it's important. I mean, I think that it's really important to sort of pull out of this sort of small microcosm of this film and the Tamil reaction to it, no? Because the reaction is not to this film only, right? So to understand that when one is digging into kind of collective pain and collective trauma, things emerge, no? Like, of course they do. And in this country, you know, the violence that happened along the lines of language make it particularly painful, no? So it's to understand that this is not I think what's coming out of the Tamil community, some of it is purely false. I think some of the accusations are unfair and are false. But I think that something like this, you know, and even when my own work is critiqued by Tamils, I take it very much as something that is connecting to a very personal, very intimate pain inside of them. And yes, 1983 was a long time ago, but 2009 wasn't that long ago, no? So this, you know, what is coming up for Tamils, what is emerging, right, is in some ways very natural, right? And so I think, yes, of course, there's a reaction from the film and the filmmaker and the writer, right? But it's important to see it as part of this bigger experience of Tamils, no? And to absorb it as such, right? That this is now, when you see that kind of reflection on the screen, a number of things will come up, right? Of course, there's the beauty of like hearing Pata Padava, right, from your childhood or from any of that. But then there's also the pain of, you know, the number of women that I know who, you know, were tricked by soldiers who were Sinhala speaking Tamil, you know, hearing that kind of inflection might evoke something, no? But it's not this kind of direct battle between the film and the Tamil community. This is just what one would expect from a community that's suffered this kind of trauma.
Something that you have to understand is that this film was finished in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, at the end, it's the pandemic still going on. We started post-production on it in April. We had actors who were in Sri Lanka. We had an actor who was in Vancouver. We had an actor who is in Toronto. Usually when you do post-production and you go into ADR, and by that time, you know, some people had seen the film, and there was a young queer, very sweet girl who'd come to see the film and come out and said, you know, the Tamil isn't really right. It just doesn't feel right what Amachi is saying. So we talked about it. Radheyan, you talked about it later as well, that the language took you out. If I'd met you, you would have probably said the same. And there were a couple of people in Sri Lanka who'd said it. And we said, okay, what do we do? So we went to Cheran and we said, let's ADR, that's additional dialogue recording, which happens in all films, that you take your actors into a studio and you have your dialect coach and they actually sit there and you go through the lines again while the picture is on the screen. We did not have that luxury. People were in lockdown. So we did what we could, actually. We listened to all these people and we did the best we could. We actually got the people, the actors in Sri Lanka, and, you know, to sit in their closets with their cell phones and do the ADR with Cheran coaching them in Toronto. We've done our best. I wish we had the money, and I wish we had both of you, you know, to come and coach them and say, this is right and this is wrong and this is, we would love that. We're stuck in pandemic and we can't do anything. So it's some little bit of understanding, a little bit of empathy about what goes into the process would be really appreciated.
I would also.
Deepa, you said it perfectly, because Radheyan, I mean, I don't do much social media, but the things I'm following is that what I'm following tells me that people are not thinking that it's a kind of miracle this film actually got made at all. I mean, it's not easy to convince anybody to fund a movie about Sri Lankans, you know, and with brown actors. And it's just, I mean, step by step, it's been a miracle to me that this film got made. And I mean, it's Deepa's sheer willpower and energy that has driven this guy. Certainly couldn't have done it.
No. Which is partly why, I mean, I don't know, I've already written about this movie twice and I haven't broached this issue because I wanted to celebrate the fact that the movie actually exists, right? And as celebrating, specifically in when I've written about it so far, this movie exists, and this movie isn't afraid to tackle the issues head on. And this movie is about as blunt as Deepa Mehta is. It's also, I think, the best movie Deepa has made since Water. So like, you know, like I'm appreciating all of these things about it. But I mean, I guess the question is like when Nimmi asks, like, well, what do we do now? It's like, it is, I mean, I'm curious to what the response will be, because we've seen the online reaction from a few people who've seen it. We've seen the online reaction from very vocal young Tamil community who are very loud, and they are of a generation that is far removed from Deepa's generation. And then I'm curious to see how my parents are going to react, just to see that their story is being told and validated. And Nedra, I'm seeing faces. I want to hear what there's a lot of thought in Nedra's face going on right now.
I wish my face was less expressive. I think some of the reaction is also because Funny Boy as a book meant so much to, and means so much to a lot of young Tamil Canadians, South Asian Canadians, I would say even. For a long time, it was the only Canadian book in English that dealt with Tamil identity. And then that spoke to a South Asian queer experience. So I've taught it. I've taught Funny Boy, and it has led to conversations. I've had students come out to me after we've done the book, and when I've taught it at colleges, I've had parents of queer kids. Basically, I mean, I figured that's what was going on, because they would say, oh, you know, my son, he's like that, you know, he's a soft boy, but, you know, so in the different ways that they would code it, and there was some sympathy that they could feel, and especially sort of dealing with a child, like a queer child, right? And the alienation that a queer child feels. Like all those aspects of it, I think spoke to a lot of young folks. And, you know, while again, on the one hand, it's easy to sort of dismiss young folks who are active on social media and whatever. I work with young people a lot, and, you know, they're dealing with trauma. They're dealing with depression. I mean, our community has very high rates of depression. We have a high number of like young people who take their own lives, right? So who are sort of desperate for, like, I think, you know, that there are so many young people I see who are desperate to see themselves in art, right? To see themselves reflected. And it's easy to sort of just turn around and say, oh, you know, Tamil parents, they don't send them into the arts. But they're also refugee parents who are in a particular sort of state of trying to prove themselves, right? To prove themselves as model minorities so that they won't be thought of as terrorists, whatever. Like there's so many factors that go into it, right? Mm-hmm. So they're desperate for that, to see themselves reflected somewhere, right? In a positive way. So I'm very thankful for Funny Boy. Like it's not. So I just wanted to add that. But
and also I think beyond. Sorry, Shyam. You know, again, beyond the Tamil community, you know, acknowledging the kind of very real concerns and issues that emerge. I mean, and I think this is really important actually for the Tamil community, but, you know, in some of the recent work that I've done, I met with a lot of that older generation of the movement in London and other places. And there was this moment, you know, in the 1970s and the early 1980s, where it was this natural sort of alliance between different resistance struggles, you know, between the Eritreans, between the Palestinians, between the Sudanese. And you know, Adele, you know, auntie in London would say, like, we sat on the floor, we were just one family, you know, all of us were one family. And particularly from working with young Tamils and other young activists, you know, you see this increasing sort of siloed activism and a really sort of narrow focus. And in some senses, I feel that we've lost this ability to create these alliances across the global south, right? And so I am also thinking about that particular young Tamil audience, but also beyond that, the young Palestinians, the young Syrians, the young, Black folks in this country. I mean, Duvernay picking it up is a huge entry point into an audience that the older generation has completely foregone politically. I mean, the inability of Tamils to ally with Black people in this country is insane to me, But at its origin, the Tamil struggle had deep ties to other movements in the global south, right? So just in terms of like political futures for our community and beyond, I think I'm hoping that this film is seen by some of these other, and that maybe it is this kind of struggle with sexual identity that pulls them toward the film, but they leave with a kind of political through line between our struggles, no?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Certainly in reaction to the book that I've heard, people do make those connections, Nimmi, when I get letters and meet readers and stuff like that. There are people across various communities identifying with it. So that's a wonderful thing about it. I just hope many and different conversations happen when people see the film, and that they are not the same conversation, and that some of them are fraught and some of them are joyful or joyful and fraught. Because I don't know. That's just what I hope. And you're right. It's all very complicated. And this issue of trauma that's not just first generation, but second and even third generation. And Nidra, I'm sure you come across it all the time with young people, as I do when teaching. So I don't know.
There's amazing amount of survival guilt. And that also has to be dealt with. I mean, and when we were working in Sri Lanka, with young people, there was so much of it. And it was tragic. This wasn't like, I thought, there was a at the end of a film, usually you give out T-shirts. The production does to the crew and the cast. And I was asked to say, what did I want written on it? And I said, my quote was, "There's nothing funny about Funny Boy." And that's what it is. There's nothing funny about Funny Boy. It's a serious film. It's warm, but it's also really serious. It's because it's about marginalized communities. How do we deal with sectarian war? How do we survive? How do we hold our head in dignity? Or are we always going to be fighting about, you are speaking Urdu badly, you are speaking Hindi badly, this is not authentic, why didn't you cast a Hindu? Yes, we can have those conversations, and let's have them. And I'm glad that the film is there so all of you can have them, actually. That's one of the reasons of making a film, is that perhaps it'll open up conversations. And with conversations comes criticism, and that's fine too.
All highways blocked off, no exits, no shortcuts. Them white flags been blood red, that bloodshed's been soaked up. Squeezed out, poured back in my cup, I toast up, then drink back my bloodline. They try bite my culture. They started telling us lies, selling them lies, shelling hospitals, getting by on a daily basis while they murder my people underneath the nose of every Pinocchio politician, news channel anchor man, Department of Police, the whole UN, the whole system they say was made to serve us, huh? Okay, cool story. Never trust no pig's word. Them lawmakers, all bakers. Bottom line is cake first. They burnt down our library on that night in June. Them fools had no clue our history is so fireproof. So tell me now, how do I show any mercy when knowing that they would have put me up under a body bag? Body been missing and nobody looking except for the mothers who want it back. This is the part that be getting me wildin', cause now they be telling this island is something for tourists and telling them this is some heavenly marvelous pearl of the Indian tropical vacation getaway. Welcome to paradise. Welcome to paradise.